All right, I think we're going to get started here. So first of all, I'm actually amazed that there are this many people in the room on day 4. Really awesome, so thanks for coming, listening to us. I think we have some interesting things to say. I'll start with my intro and then hand it to Marianne. So Stu Vaith, I'm with our Mastercard Global Digital Identity product team. And my role is the US business, so really responsible for establishing the business strategy, bringing partners, customers, and the ecosystem together, and bringing compelling use cases to the market. I've been with Mastercard a little over 4 years. Marianne?
Hello, everyone. I'm Marianne Miller. I'm the Vice President of Client Experience, but also I'm a Fraud and Cybercrime Executive Advisor. If you all want to link in with me, you can see more about what I do, but I'm internationally known. I've worked and lived globally, love what I do, often quoted in the media, and appreciate all of you coming here today, and I think you'll find this session very valuable. Okay. Let me tell you a little bit about Prove. So my company that I work for is sponsoring this particular discussion, and Prove is, if all of you, how many of you have your phones with you? Everyone in this room has their phones with you. And how many of you maybe logged into your bank app this week to check the balance or pay a bill or do something? There's a good chance that Prove protected that interaction. So Prove, we are a modern way of establishing identity, and if you want to think about it, when you log into your app or when you conduct a transaction, it's really important to know who's on the other end of that interaction, and Prove helps answer that question in a modern way. We do this for financial services, we do this for insurance, healthcare, and some of the like household names that we all engage with every day. So you'll hear more about how we do that later in the presentation, but I just wanted to give you a brief overview of what we do. I'm specifically joined Prove because I worked at a fintech during the pandemic, and that became a nationally chartered bank. And I saw the challenges with digital identity, both in public and private sector. And I actually was a customer of Prove because I needed Prove to actually help enhance my multi-layered security process. So we'll hear more about how Prove helped that. Stuart?
All right, so I only have 2 slides. Not going to bore you with lots of slides. And I want to talk to you about, I think, what we all know is going on in the industry, but then what Mastercard is doing specifically in the context of this evolution that we've all heard about as well this week. Today, what we all live through is one-time ID proofing, ID verification, right? Every site you go to, every new thing you need to register for, you need to prove who you are at some level of assurance. It may be very simple, maybe just verify my email, but in a lot of cases it's actually a lot of friction because there's a lot of value associated with that. And there's a very crowded vendor field out there, a lot of solutions, especially in the US market. So Mastercard has said, all right, let's dip our toes into this, not as a strategic thing in itself, because that's really not our business to compete at an IDV specific level, but we do have a lot of signals, and we've got some great partnerships, Prove being one of them. But the real strategic vision and our investment is around reusable identity, creating an ID network that we've also heard a lot about, but it's very hard to do. What's common to both of these things is this one, many aspects, but this aspect of assurance, right, of can I really trust this identity, this remote person or entity on the other end, and friction, right, that user experience, because you can't underestimate that user experience, right? We know that's why some of these other solutions out there with like 0 friction are getting a lot of adoption. And they're giving things like trust scores and confidence levels. It's not proofing, but it's good enough for a lot of use cases. So we've adapted Prove as one foundational component of our ID verification story because it actually has a really nice balance of that friction, especially around prefill, verified prefill, very low friction to verify someone's identity at a very strong level. not a GovID level, but actually strong enough to open financial accounts for KYC use cases, verify key credentials, your date of birth, your SSN, your address, name, phone number, of course, and it's authenticated, right? So this authentication element brings the strength to it. It's not just data aggregation. So that's, and we'll talk about a use case involving that in the next slide. We also have other sources. Ekata we've acquired. Jumio is a great partner as well for document proofing, document verification, biometric face match. So we think we have a nice combination of tools to bring to one-time ID verification. Why is that relevant to our story to network? Is because, well, today people don't have these reusable IDs, at least in the US. They do in a lot of other countries. Government ID initiatives are getting very good traction. But in the US, it's quite fragmented. There really isn't a lot of reusable IDs out there. So one way is I go through an ID proofing event, through pre-fill, through a doc verification, whatever it is, and then at the end of that moment of identity moment of having to verify myself, say, get a reusable ID. Then you don't have to do this next time, right? Make it simple, incentivize. So there's some business, it's not just tech. There's business incentives to say, yep, let me get a reusable ID where I can make this process simpler next time and use it not just here at this particular relying party, airline merchant, whatever it is, bank, but at many places, right? It's the vision of the credit card payment network, right, that Mastercard, Visa, and other, have built to say, accept it everywhere, right? That's the vision. And why is Mastercard investing in this network? It is around governance and creating this two-sided network, right? Because the technology is all there, but what's very hard is managing the trust and the legal and the economic model and the technology interoperability for two-sided networks and bringing identities into the network so that relying parties get value out of the gate. So part of that is not just creating new user identities, but actually leveraging partners in ecosystems that have millions of verified identities today, which we know, right? Banks, telcos, others, that identity providers that have governments, MDLs coming out in the US. So having a very open ecosystem is our model to bring identities in, fit in, provide a trust model so that we can convey that trust, that assurance level to relying parties. And bringing use cases, certainly payments is a natural focus area, but is a difficult one, right? To make really work and bring value, but bringing identity-based payments to the market is very significant, brings a lot of volume, brings it home to a lot of consumers who, and there's still, as we know, a lot of fraud in card-not-present transactions, so bringing fraud down to the floor, bringing that user experience for things like guest checkout. And from a privacy and data perspective, I personally don't want to store my data. We all know data at all these places is bad, but also my card info, my payment information. I don't want to put card on file everywhere. So why not have that in a portable identity? So think of your identity as just, it's a set of attributes, a set of verified data about you. Some of it is kind of key things, who you are, your verified name or date of birth and things for demographic matching, but then attributes, right, and attestations that we can add to that. What are we doing in the market? I'll just wrap it, but we have launched in Australia, so with telecom, so we're in the market with our identity network in Australia. We are live in Brazil in educations for students, so we've just had a big week there in providing university students with digital identities, reusable for tests, for enrollment. So trying to really get proof points in the market, real use cases that solve problems. In the US, we have not launched the network. We have this identity verification service, and we're going to be piloting some ID network cases later this year. So with that, let's talk about healthcare. And this case study we did with Ripple, Ripple is a digital health service that's kind of a front end to a health provider in Wisconsin, ThedaCare. Regional healthcare, a lot of rural users, patients. And before we get into the use case, why is healthcare relevant? Why is Mastercard getting into healthcare? Well, identity in healthcare is just a huge problem, right? There's, at the top level, patient matching today is awful in the US. Johns Hopkins did a study in 2016 about preventable medical errors and came out with it as the third leading cause of death in the US. 250,000 people die a year from preventable medical errors. And of course, digital identity is not the one thing. Interoperable health records is a key thing, but having verified identity to a specific person will solve a lot of the bad outcomes that occur from not having patient data to make good decisions and bring it to the user. BeWell is one of these digital health applications, personal health applications, that they white label to customers, providers like ThedaCare, to make it much easier for users to manage their health, to be patient-centric. So like we've all kind of familiar with open banking concept, right? Let me aggregate all my banking, financial data in one place. This is kind of an open health concept. Let me aggregate my health data in one place. And for people that are seriously ill or have, health data all over the place from lots of providers, you have chronic, it's a mess today, right? You're trying to log in all these portals, you can't get your data, the data's not shared, and bad outcomes occur. Data's not really readily available to the specific provider or appointment you're trying to solve. So BeWell's been a great partner for this, and what we've done is they've implemented our verified form fill implementation, ID verification, supported by Prove, about a year and a half ago, and started enrolling all their users into this Ripple platform with this service, and had great results, right? Quantifiable, very nice outcomes. So much lower reduction, or 35% reduction in drop-off, just friction, right? So that friction of going through a manual process, high success rate, 87% success rate of instant verification, positive verification of the users onboarding. And obviously a high assurance of that identity so they can use it for good patient matching, right? Back to the provider's data and other data around it. So kind of solving this, this is really Stu Vaith with this correct demographic, because there's a lot of patient error, data errors that happen even just in getting people onboarded into clinics and hospitals and doctors' offices. So that's been very successful as a first step, but it is just a first step. It is a strong ID proofing to enroll people, to get access to their provider data, and a lot of other capabilities to provide for personal health management. What we're doing now with BeWell is expanding this to be a higher level of assurance, meeting NIST IL2, which requires more than just one source, one prefill. So we're leveraging document verification in addition to that phone-based verification to give a high bar. And what that allows for is to access patient records through these national health information exchanges. So getting much broader now, as a patient of ThedaCare Ripple, I can get access to my health records all over the country from different providers. And that bar, in order to get access to that very sensitive data, is a NIST IL2 proofed identity. So we're implementing that now with our platform with BeWell. And the next step, the more strategic step, is we're implementing a proof of concept as part of an industry alliance, Karen Alliance initiative for reusable identity. So then I'd take those same tools of strong authenticated phone-based verification with government ID, biometric face identification, bring that together into a reusable ID that can be used to get access to these records in a reusable way, and starting to build a base of users and outcomes to share this more openly with beyond a few companies here, a few providers, to a more universal health network. And obviously health is just one interesting vertical market. Commerce and financial, fintech, travel, education. There's a number of really great use cases for reusable identity, and we're hoping to be able to tackle those over the next coming year or two. So, back to you.
Stuart, I really love that use case. I just moved from California to Florida, and I can't tell you how difficult it's been to get all my medical records, dental records, everything transferred just from one state to another in the U.S. You can imagine if you moved globally or internationally. Identity, I like to tell everyone that security and customer experience don't need to be mutually exclusive, that you can really build in those good identity proofing processes, authentication and verification processes in your customer journey or in your user journey, your patient journey, and really ease, not only enable that journey to be secure with good identity proofing, but you also can build off the back of that and make better products. So I really love this use case of BeWell. So we talked a lot about some practical use cases and where proof's being used in the industry, but what's kind of behind what the secret sauce behind what helps to enable this? And it's kind of a mouthful. It's cryptographic authentication. So, but it's really a very important part of how Prove really starts to differentiate ourselves in the marketplace. If you think about it, when I was, at the fintech again, moving to a nationally chartered bank, I had solutions in place that told me that this is Mary Ann's name, this is her social security number, her date of birth, and her address. But when when Mary Ann Miller applied for an account, I didn't have solutions in place initially that told me Mary Ann was presenting her own information. As we all know, data breaches are announced daily, weekly. We all get data breach notifications. But triangulating both in public sector and private sector that Mary Ann's actually presenting her information in the flow is really critical, and it's something that's being discussed all over the industry, all over multiple industries today, and Proof's playing an important role in that. So the way that works is there's a secure handshake that occurs, and that's my term for it, it's not a very technical term, but between the user, the applicant, the patient, and also between the cell phone providers with the unique serial number or the SIM on the SIM card. So there's a triangulation, and we know that Mary Ann Miller's live on that network. We know she's on the other end of that interaction, and we know that she's presenting that information. Not only do we know that, we understand the trust behind that phone. We understand, does that phone make calls? How long? What's the tenure of that phone? What's the trust level of that phone? Is it just been purchased yesterday, and we don't have any history on that phone? We understand if that phone's been SIM swapped or ported, and we understand if that's been a legitimate SIM or porting event, or whether that's been a fraudulent porting or SIM event. So there's a lot about the trust of the phone, and then also you're really looking at in the future really understanding more of using that phone number as a token, your identity token. So that's really important parts of how Prove really looks at really proving identity. What's great about the approach is if you're on the mobile network, this can all be done silently. So it's really a passive way for your customer to have a good customer experience. If they are on Wi-Fi or they happen to be on their laptop, we can do this with a secure link. So you can tap on the link and make it a very easy customer experience as well. Again, this is authenticated and verified interactions so that we can actually tell you that Mary Ann Miller is at the other end of that device presenting her own information, which is extremely important. What I like to share here is, this is a real case study. Whoops, sorry about that. Using Prove, and what the red line shows is, or orange I guess, is showing that this was a customer of ours that was using traditional methods. For example, we maybe, I don't know what businesses you all work in, but many in financial services, many tools are in place that, again, do what I call entity resolution. Tell you that Mary Ann's name, social, date of birth, and address are a real person. They're not synthetic. Prove we do have synthetic indicators as well. But what it doesn't do is tell you Mary Ann's on the other end. And we had a customer who works with us with hundreds and thousands of interactions daily, and are looking at an important process of lending, and that's an important process. If you get that wrong, you certainly can run into a situation where your organization's at a great loss. So when Prove went in, we improved the customer experience. We were actually pre-filling the information for that user, and in this particular case, this customer asked for the mobile phone number, you ask for some kind of challenge information that can be the last four of the social, the full social, the date of birth, and we can actually pre-fill that verified data in that flow. And that is also authenticated through the cryptographic authentication handshake. And what we did see is in this particular use case, the customer was able to onboard much more business safely and reduce their fraud rates significantly. So they were, if you can imagine, if you're onboarding bad actors with identity theft or bad actors with synthetics, they're going to immediately bust out. They're going to take the funds and run. Well, in this particular case, once Prove was implemented, not only was this organization able to offer, a very smooth and seamless customer experience, but also reduce fraud and get accurate information for identity as well. So I just think it's, coming from the practitioner side, you can have a case study and really show the actual results. It's quite impressive. Any questions? We can open up to the audience. Love to answer any questions.
I'll just speak loud.
Okay.
So in the Mastercard, I think you showed at 360 one of the metrics or one of the data points was device assurance, and then you were talking about how Prove looks at phones for SIM swaps. Do you go any lower? OECD about 2 years ago actually did a report on the amount of counterfeit phones out there. So even if you have a phone that has a history with an established SIM, if in fact that doesn't have OEM parts or is a compromised phone, that is a whole nother attack vector. So do you go down to the level of looking at the OEM parts in the phone to see if it's been compromised?
So that's beyond my technical expertise to be able to answer, but I'll be happy to get back with you on that. I'm aware of the problem with counterfeit phones, certainly. I'm not aware in our technology how we identify that. I'm sure, but there's something that we identify. Now, maybe what we do is lower the trust score in that particular situation, but I'll get back with you on that question.
And more broadly, I think this is why, kind of our philosophy, it takes time to build all this, but is to bring in multiple signals, right? Lots of sources. So ICATA brings in risk signals, right? Dynamic risk signals around IP address and phone and name and other elements. We have NewDetect, another capability that provides behavioral biometrics and device trust network in terms of devices itself. So bringing in these different signals to a decision is kind of, we think, the right kind of balance of to solve some of these more advanced attacks.
I think we have a couple more questions. We'll go with you and then you. Okay. Yeah.
Like this, right? How's that experience been? Are you getting the right kinds of signals for you to be able to score identities, verified, SIM tenure, and such parameters?
Yeah, that's a great question. We absolutely do. We have significant partnerships and integrations with all the major carriers in the U.S. We also are working internationally in the U.K. and other markets. We're expanding globally. So you're absolutely right. It does require that, and that's what is great. We've been doing this for years. And just expanding on how we approach that particular, but yes, we do. We have close partnerships with all of the AT&T, even the track phone providers, track phone, and some of the other providers that are partners of the major carriers as well. I think the question back here.
I think the answer to my question might also be multiple signals, but I'll ask it anyway. Are you doing anything specific to avoid creating an equity situation for disadvantaged people who might have no choice other than to use a pay-per-use phone and don't have tenure?
Yeah, that's a really good question, and I can answer that. We have a lot of history. There's a lot of people that actually have pay-as-you-go phones with history, actually. So we do track that. We track prepaid. We have all of the history on those phones. Even if they're lower cost phones, we do track all of that at Prove.
And you're absolutely right. It is other sort. Like, not everybody's going to have a phone, and we are all about inclusion, actually global. So we're looking at other forms of ID. Obviously starting very simply with a doc. If you have an ID, but no phone, no banking history and all. You can actually bring strong identities in. Biometrics, right? If they're decentralized, distributed, not centrally stored, biometrics, QR codes can solve strong identity verification in areas where you don't have the technology there.
think we
Looks like we're out of time.
We have, yeah, I think we're out of time. I appreciate that. If there's some other follow-up questions, Stuart and I will be here for a couple of minutes, and we can be glad to answer those questions for you. Appreciate everyone. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for attending.